Welcome to HFY Galaxy Tales. Like this video and subscribe the channel for more HFY stories. The first time I saw Marcus Reed, he was being escorted through the detention corridor by 3 security drones and Administrator Velm, who looked like she'd rather be processing waste recycling permits. This was saying something, because Administrator Velm was a Croatian, and Croatians actually enjoyed tedious bureaucratic tasks the way humans apparently enjoyed something called coffee and complaining about Monday mornings. Another one? I asked, my third eye swiveling to get a better look at the human boy slouching between the hovering drones. Another one, Velm confirmed, her mandibles clicking in what I'd learned was exasperation. Marcus Reed. Age 16. Expelled from 4 institutions across 3 sectors in the past 2 years. I blinked all 3 eyes slowly. For schools. That's got to be some kind of record. Oh, it gets better, Velm said, pulling up his file on her datapad. The holographic display flickered to life, and I leaned in to read. Fighting. Vandalism. Insubordination. Hacking into the principal's personal messages at Station Academy 12 and broadcasting them over the morning announcements. Setting off the fire suppression systems during standardized testing. Reprogramming the cafeteria dispensers to only serve desserts for an entire week. The human, Marcus, stood there with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking at absolutely nothing in particular. He had that expression humans get when they're pretending they can't hear you talking about them. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he deliberately ignored several grooming protocols. So why is he here? I asked. Surely Galactic Prep Academy has standards. Oh, we do, Velm assured me. Which is exactly why the council sent him. They want to see if we can perform him. She made the air quotes gesture she'd learned from humans, which looked particularly amusing when you had 4 arms. Apparently, we're the last chance before juvenile detention. Marcus's eyes flicked toward us for just a moment. They were brown, unremarkable by most standards, but there was something in them. Not defiance, exactly. More like, calculation. Right, I said, grabbing my teaching tablet. Send him to orientation. I'll process the paperwork. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of Marcus Reed sitting in the back of my interstellar history class, doing absolutely nothing to draw attention to himself. 3 months of perfect attendance, completed assignments, and 0 disciplinary incidents. It was, quite frankly, terrifying. He's planning something, I told Professor Harrick during lunch break in the faculty lounge. Harrick was a Vexian, all scales and philosophical wisdom, and he'd been teaching at Galactic Prep for 73 years. You're being paranoid, Harrick said, not looking up from his datapad where he was reading something about ancient Earth literature. Perhaps the boy has simply matured. In 3 months. After 4 expulsions. Stranger things have happened. I wasn't convinced. I'd been watching Marcus carefully, and here's what I'd noticed, he was smart. Really smart. The kind of smart that made you wonder why he'd been causing trouble in the first place. His essays on the Andromedan conflicts were insightful beyond his years. His understanding of quantum mechanics was better than some of my graduate students. And yet, he never raised his hand, never volunteered information, never did anything to stand out. Until the day Brentix Cole decided to make an issue of it. Brentix was a Theranian, which meant he was roughly the size of a small transport vehicle and had an ego to match. His family owned half the mining operations in the Outer Rim, and he made sure everyone knew it. On this particular morning, he'd decided that the human taking up space in his academy was worthy of his attention. Hey, disruption boy, Brentix called out across the commons area during break. His voice boomed like thunder, and conversations died around us. I heard you got kicked out of 4 schools. That's impressive. Most humans can't even count that high. Marcus was sitting on one of the benches, reading something on his personal device. He didn't look up. I'm talking to you, human, Brentix said, moving closer. His friends, a collection of equally privileged students from various species, followed like pilot fish around a shark. This was it, I thought. This was where Marcus would snap, where whatever had gotten him expelled 4 times would rear its head, and I'd have to file incident reports for the rest of the day. Instead, Marcus looked up, regarded Brentix with those calculating brown eyes, and said, "Sorry, were you talking to me?" I thought I heard something, but it sounded like it was coming from the waste disposal unit. The commons area went completely silent. Brentix's face, if you could call it a face, turned a fascinating shade of purple. "What did you just say?" "Oh, you are capable of hearing," Marcus said, standing up. He was tall for a human, but still had to look up to meet Brentix's eyes. I was starting to wonder. See, I figured anyone who'd interrupt someone's reading just to throw around tired insults about species intelligence must have some kind of auditory processing issue. But hey, I'm not a doctor. Maybe you should get that checked out. I should have stepped in. I was right there. But I was too fascinated by what was happening. Brentix reached out one massive hand, clearly intending to grab Marcus by the collar and lift him off the ground. It was a classic bully move, one I'd seen 100 times. Marcus didn't flinch. Didn't step back. Just stood there, watching. Brentix's hand stopped an inch from Marcus's shirt. "Think about it," Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried in the silence. "You put your hands on me, and what happens? Best case scenario, you get suspended. Your parents get called. There's an inquiry. All very tedious, very public. Worst case. I press charges. There's a trial. Interstellar news picks it up. Poor defenseless human student attacked by privileged alien bully. How do you think that plays out for your family's business contracts?" Brentix's hand trembled. "But hey," Marcus continued, picking up his device, "if you really want to find out, go ahead. I've got time. I've already been expelled 4 times. What's one more?" The moment stretched out like taffy. Then Brentix lowered his hand. "You're not worth it," he muttered. "That's what they all say," Marcus replied, sitting back down and returning to his reading as if nothing had happened. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations resuming in hushed whispers. I stood there, stunned. Harwick found me 10 minutes later, still standing in the same spot. "You were right," I admitted. "He is planning something." Or, Harwick said thoughtfully, "He's learned that the best way to disrupt a system isn't through obvious rebellion, but through exposing its flaws." That's terrifying. That's humans. Over the next few weeks, I watched more carefully. And what I saw was remarkable. Marcus never started trouble, but he seemed to have an uncanny ability to be present whenever trouble was happening. When a group of students were caught cheating on an exam, Marcus was the one who'd mentioned to the proctor that he'd noticed unusual similarities in their answers. When funding for the arts program was about to be cut, Marcus was the one who'd compiled a comprehensive report showing how arts education correlated with better outcomes in STEM fields, then left it anonymously in the headmaster's inbox. When a particular teacher was showing favoritism toward wealthy students, Marcus documented every instance with dates, times, and witnesses, then somehow that documentation ended up in the hands of the school board. He never took credit. Never bragged. Just quietly, methodically, made things happen. He's like a catalyst, I told Harwick one evening as we were reviewing student progress reports. He doesn't change things directly. He just creates the conditions for change. And you're still convinced he's a troublemaker? I pulled up Marcus's file, looking at those 4 expulsions again. On impulse, I decided to dig deeper. I sent requests to the previous schools for detailed incident reports, not just the summaries. What I found made me reassess everything. Station Academy 12, where Marcus had broadcast the principal's messages, those messages had revealed that the principal was accepting bribes from wealthy families to guarantee admission for underqualified students. The principal was currently under investigation. Orbital High 7, where he'd set off the fire suppression systems during testing, the tests had been leaked to certain students in advance. The disruption had forced a complete investigation, leading to the discovery of a cheating ring that went all the way to the district superintendent. Covenant Prep, where he'd reprogrammed the cafeteria dispensers, the food service company had been cutting corners, serving substandard nutrition while charging premium prices. The week of desserts had triggered a health and safety audit that uncovered multiple violations. Armstrong Secondary, I was still waiting on those records. Rick, I said slowly, I don't think Marcus was expelled for being a troublemaker. No. I think he was expelled because he was too much trouble for the people who were actually causing problems. My old colleague looked at me over his reading glasses, a very human affectation he'd picked up. And what do you suppose he's doing here at Galactic Prep? That was the question, wasn't it? I got my answer 2 weeks later when the entire student body received an anonymous message during morning assembly. It was a simple spreadsheet, really. Just a list of names, positions, and numbers. But those numbers told a very interesting story about how student activity fees were being allocated. Specifically, how they were being allocated to a private account belonging to the vice headmaster. The school exploded into activity. Auditors arrived within hours. The vice headmaster was escorted from the premises by actual law enforcement. The headmaster called an emergency faculty meeting where she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single morning. And Marcus Reed sat in my 4th period class, taking notes on the reformation of the Centauri Alliance, his expression as neutral as always. Did you do this? I asked him after class, when the other students had filed out. He looked up at me with those calculating eyes. Do what, Professor Carinth? You know what? I'm just a student, he said, gathering his materials. I go to class. I do my homework. I stay out of trouble. Marcus. He paused at the door, then turned back. For the first time since he'd arrived, he smiled. It wasn't a smug smile or a rebellious one. It was tired. You want to know why I got expelled 4 times, he asked. Because I couldn't stand watching people in power abuse it while everyone else just accepted it as normal. Because I saw what was wrong and I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Because apparently, pointing out that the emperor has no clothes makes you a troublemaker. So you decided to become a different kind of troublemaker. I decided to become the kind nobody sees coming, he corrected. The kind that doesn't give them an excuse to dismiss me as just another rebellious kid. You can't expel someone for being a model student, Professor. Even if they're making you very uncomfortable. He left, and I sat there at my desk, thinking about what he'd said. The thing about Marcus Reed was that he understood something fundamental about systems and institutions. They're run by people, and people have patterns, weaknesses, blind spots. He'd learned to work within those blind spots, to use the rules against those who thought the rules didn't apply to them. He wasn't disrupting the school. He was revealing that the school was already disrupted, that there were cracks in the foundation that everyone had been ignoring. And that, I realized, was far more dangerous than any amount of fighting or vandalism could ever be. Because you can't fix what you refuse to see. And Marcus Reed was very good at making people see. The weeks following the vice headmaster's arrest were, to put it mildly, absolute madness. Investigators crawled through every corner of Galactic Prep Academy like Vorton beetles through a grain shipment. Financial audits. Interviews. Document requests. The whole institution was turned inside out, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The embezzlement hadn't been limited to student activity fees. It went back years. Scholarship funds had been redirected. Equipment purchases had been inflated with kickbacks going to administrative staff. There was even evidence suggesting that admission decisions had been influenced by under-the-table payments, just like at Station Academy 12. Galactic Prep, the most prestigious educational institution in this sector, had been rotting from the inside. And through it all, Marcus Reed continued to attend classes, complete his assignments, and maintain perfect behavior. I wasn't the only one watching him now. Half the faculty had connected the dots, though nobody could prove anything. The student body was divided. Some saw him as a hero. Others, particularly those whose families had benefited from the corrupt system, saw him as a traitor. Most just wanted the whole mess to be over so they could go back to complaining about homework and cafeteria food like normal students. You should talk to him, Harwick suggested one afternoon as we watched Marcus sitting alone in the library, working on what appeared to be an essay for xenosociology. And say what? Thanks for burning down our administration. It needed burning, Harwick pointed out. We all knew something wasn't right. We just didn't want to acknowledge it. Too much effort. Too much risk to our comfortable positions. He was right, of course. We'd all seen the signs. The preferential treatment for certain students. The mysterious budget shortfalls. The way some families seemed to get whatever they wanted while others were told resources were limited. We'd known, and we'd done nothing. A 16-year-old human had shown more courage than an entire faculty of seasoned educators. That thought sat in my stomach like spoiled nutrition paste. I walked over to Marcus's table and sat down across from him. He glanced up, noted my presence, and went back to his work. You're writing about the Kelvin Accords, I observed, looking at his screen. Yes, ma'am. Interesting choice. Most students find that topic dry. Most students don't recognize that the Kelvin Accords fundamentally restructured power dynamics across 17 systems by making corruption transparent and publicly accountable, Marcus said, still typing. Which is only dry if you don't care about how systems of governance actually function. I had to laugh. You really can't help yourself, can you? That got his attention. He stopped typing and looked at me directly. Help what? Seeing the patterns. The power structures. The ways things really work beneath the surface. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with that unsettling intensity humans sometimes displayed. Is there a question in there, Professor? Why here? I asked. You could have stopped. After 4 expulsions, you could have just played it safe. Kept your head down. Graduated from wherever they sent you next and moved on with your life. Why risk it again? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that seemed almost unconscious. Finally, he spoke. My sister, he said quietly. Younger than me by 3 years. Smart as hell, wanted to be an engineer. Got into a good school on scholarship. Full ride, everything paid for. Except the scholarship fund at that school was being embezzled by the financial director. When the whole thing collapsed, she lost everything. The school shut down. Her credits didn't transfer properly. She's 2 years behind now, working 3 jobs to afford community college courses. His jaw tightened, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not calculation. Pain. Nobody was punished, he continued. The director took a golden parachute and retired to some colony world where extradition is complicated. The board members claimed ignorance. The students were just told, tough luck, that's life. And everyone acted like this was normal. Like systematic theft from kids trying to better themselves was just an acceptable cost of doing business. So you decided to make sure it wasn't acceptable, I said softly. I decided that if the adults weren't going to fix broken systems, someone had to. He met my eyes. Even if that someone was just a kid who kept getting expelled. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the library hummed with the quiet activity of students studying, researching, learning. All of them trusting that the institution around them was functioning honestly, that the people in charge had their best interests at heart. Most of them would never know how close that trust had come to being completely betrayed. The investigators are finishing up next week, I said. They'll be releasing their final report. Marcus nodded. I know. There will be more arrests. More people removed from their positions. Good. And you? What happens to you when this is all over? He smiled that tired smile again. Probably the same thing that always happens, Professor. They'll decide I'm too much of a liability. Too dangerous to have around. Some administrator will find a technicality, some rule I technically broke, and I'll be on my way to school number 6. That doesn't bother you? Of course it bothers me, he said, and for the first time, he sounded his age. 16. Just a kid. I'm tired, Professor Carinth. I'm tired of being the one who has to point out that things are wrong. I'm tired of being punished for caring. I'm tired of adults looking at me like I'm the problem instead of the corruption I'm exposing. He closed his laptop with a soft click. But I'm more tired of watching people suffer because the people in charge think they're untouchable, he finished. So yeah, I'll probably get expelled again. And yeah, I'll probably end up at another school with another set of problems. And I'll probably expose those too. Because that's apparently what I do now. I wanted to tell him it would be different this time. That surely, after everything that had happened, the administration would recognize his value. That they wouldn't punish someone for revealing the truth. But I'd been teaching long enough to know better. 3 days later, I was called to Headmaster Vinthria's office. She was a Pelothian, all crystalline skin and precise movements, and she'd been appointed temporary headmaster after the previous administration had been dismantled. Professor Carinth, she greeted me, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss Marcus Reed. Here it comes, I thought. His academic performance has been exemplary, Vinthria continued, pulling up his records. Top marks in every subject. Perfect attendance. No behavioral incidents on record since his arrival. He's been a model student, I agreed carefully. Yes, Vinthria said. Which makes this rather difficult. She handed me a datapad. On it was a formal expulsion notice, already drafted, waiting only for her signature. You can't be serious, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. I don't have a choice, Vinthria replied, and she actually sounded regretful. The board met yesterday. Several families have threatened to withdraw their students if Marcus remains enrolled. They claim they don't feel safe with someone who has such a documented history of disruption. He exposed corruption. He violated privacy protocols, accessed secured systems without authorization, and distributed confidential information, Vinthria countered. Those are the technical charges. The fact that what he revealed was criminal activity doesn't change the methods he used. So we're going to expel the student who saved this institution from its own corrupt administration, I said flatly. That's the message we're sending. The message we're sending, Vinthria said, and her tone hardened, is that there are proper channels for addressing grievances. That we are a society of laws and procedures, not vigilante justice. And when those proper channels are controlled by the very people who are corrupt? She didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe she did, but it wasn't one she wanted to say out loud. I left her office feeling like I'd swallowed glass. The news spread through the school faster than a computer virus. By the time I reached my classroom for afternoon lectures, students were already organizing. There were petitions. Protests. A group of juniors had chained themselves to the main entrance, refusing to move until the expulsion was reversed. Marcus, predictably, was not among the protesters. I found him in his usual spot in the library, packing up his belongings. You heard, I said. It wasn't a question. Of course I heard. He carefully placed a datapad into his bag, then a stack of actual physical books. Humans and their attachment to paper. I've been through this 4 times before, remember? I know what it looks like when an institution decides you're more trouble than you're worth. The students are protesting. They're fighting for you. He paused, something like surprise crossing his face. Really? Yes, really. You've made an impact here, Marcus. People see what you did. They understand why it mattered. That's nice, he said, and he sounded sincere. But it won't change anything. The families with money and influence will get what they want. That's how it always works. So you're just going to leave? Give up? Marcus looked at me, and in that moment, he seemed much older than 16. I'm not giving up, Professor. I'm being strategic. See, the thing about getting expelled is that it creates a paper trail. And enough paper trails start to form a pattern. Eventually, someone with actual authority is going to notice that pattern and ask why one student keeps exposing corruption at multiple institutions. And when they start digging. He trailed off, smiling that calculating smile I'd come to recognize. You planned this, I said, stunned. All of it. You knew you'd get expelled. I suspected it was likely, he corrected. But that's okay. I'm not the story here, Professor. The corruption is the story. My expulsion is just going to make it a bigger story. More public. Harder to sweep under the rug. That's incredibly cynical for someone your age. Maybe, he agreed, shouldering his bag. Or maybe I've just learned that sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. The protests lasted 3 days. Students walked out of classes. Faculty members submitted formal complaints. Alumni threatened to withhold donations. The local news networks picked up the story, then the sector-wide networks, then the galactic feeds. Exactly as Marcus had predicted. Human student expelled for exposing corruption made for a much better headline than Vice Headmaster arrested for embezzlement. The media loved it. A 16-year-old taking on an entire system of institutional corruption. David versus Goliath, they called it, referencing some ancient Earth story. The Galactic Education Commission announced an investigation into all 5 schools Marcus had attended. Questions were being asked in council chambers across multiple systems. How had one student found corruption at 5 different institutions? Was this a systemic problem? What reforms were needed? And through it all, Marcus Reed quietly transferred to his 6th school, a small academy on the outer rim that nobody had ever heard of. I received a message from him 2 weeks after he left. Just a short note, thanks for believing in me, Professor. Even if you didn't always show it. P.S. You might want to check into where your department's equipment budget has been going for the past 5 years. Just a thought. I followed his suggestion. What I found led to 3 more administrative resignations and a complete overhaul of the school's financial oversight procedures. 6 months later, I got another message. This one was longer. Professor Carenth, thought you'd want to know that school number 6 didn't last long. Found some irregularities in their accreditation process. Currently at school number 7. The food here is terrible, but the math teacher is actually pretty good. Also, my sister got into engineering school. Full scholarship, properly funded this time. She says thanks, even though she still thinks I'm an idiot for getting expelled so much. She's probably right. But someone has to point out when the emperor has no clothes. Might as well be me. Marcus. I printed that message and pinned it to my office wall, right next to my teaching credentials and awards for academic excellence. Harik saw it one day and asked me what it meant. It means, I said, that sometimes the biggest disruptions are the ones we need most. And sometimes the troublemakers are the only ones brave enough to tell the truth. He studied the message for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Humans, he said, shaking his head. They really are something, aren't they? Yes, I agreed, thinking of a tired 16-year-old boy who decided that fixing broken systems was more important than staying comfortable. They really are. The final report on Galactic Prep's corruption scandal ran to 347 pages. It detailed years of financial malfeasance, academic fraud, and abuse of power. 17 people were criminally charged. The school underwent complete administrative restructuring. New oversight boards were established. Transparent financial reporting became mandatory. And nowhere in those 347 pages was Marcus Reed's name mentioned. But every single person who read that report, who benefited from the reforms it sparked, who saw justice served because someone had been brave enough to shine a light into dark corners, they all owed a debt to a human teenager who'd been sent to us for disruption. We just hadn't realized that the disruption we needed wasn't to our classes or our schedules or our comfortable routines. It was to our complacency. Marcus Reed didn't disrupt the school. He revealed that the school had been disrupted all along, broken by the very people trusted to run it. And when he left, the silence that followed wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of an institution holding its breath, finally forced to confront what it had become. And in that silence, we began the hard work of becoming something better. I still get messages from Marcus sometimes. He's at school number 12 now. Still finding corruption. Still exposing it. Still getting expelled. Still changing the galaxy, one institution at a time. And every time I hear about another scandal broken open, another corrupt official brought down, another system reformed because someone was brave enough to ask difficult questions, I wonder if somewhere out there, a tired human teenager had anything to do with it. Usually, I'm right.